What if some of the biggest mysteries in the world aren't hidden in ancient ruins, but in a kind of code? Well, there's a modern theory doing the rounds that claims to have found exactly that, a complex mathematical pattern right inside the Quran that might just explain its most enigmatic letters.
Okay, so let's get right into it. This whole thing starts with the mukata. They're these disconnected individual letters that show up at the start of 29 different chapters in the Quran. And for, over 1400 years, nobody's known what they mean. They're considered a divine secret, one of the great unsolved puzzles in Islam. So, here's how we're going to walk through this. First, we'll talk about the letters themselves. Then we'll get into the code this theory proposes, see how it actually works, and finally, look at the pretty intense debate that it sparked. Right, so for centuries, the established answer has basically been only God knows. That's it. Scholars have put forward ideas, sure. Maybe they're abbreviations for divine names, or maybe some kind of celestial sign. But honestly, no one really knows for sure. And that's the mystery that opens the door for a theory like this one. So this modern theory, it's called Mathani symbolic numerology, and it comes at this from a totally different angle. It asks this really radical question. What if we've been looking at this all wrong? What if these aren't letters in the way we think of them, but are actually keys to unlocking a hidden system of numbers? Now, at the very core of this whole idea is this concept of duality. The theory suggests that just like you have concepts of, say, the physical world and the spiritual world, numbers themselves are split into two teams, symbolically speaking. One team represents stability, and the other represents transformation. And here's how the theory splits them up. The prime numbers, 2, 3, 5, and 7, are called the pillars. Think of them as the bedrock, the foundational, unchanging truths. Then you have all the other single-digit numbers. Those are called the bridges. They're the dynamic ones, the agents of change and movement. Okay, so we've got these two types of numbers, but how do they interact? Well, the theory proposes a very specific, four-step process. It's called the Mathani cycle, and it claims this cycle can reveal any number's true symbolic purpose. The process itself is surprisingly simple. It's just a repeatable formula. You pick a number, you add 10 to it, you double that result, and then you just add up the digits of that result until you get a single digit. And that idea of repetition is so important because the name Mathani actually comes from a Quranic word that's often translated as the oft-repeated. Let's just walk through an example to see how it works. We'll use the number 7, which in this system is a stable pillar number, symbolizing things like the 7 heavens. So you start with 7. Step 2, you add 10. That gives you 17. Simple enough?
Then you double it. That doubling reflects that idea of pairs or repetition. So 2 times 17 gets you 34.
And finally, you sum the digits of the result. So 3 plus 4 equals 7. And notice that the cycle started with a stable number, 7, and it ended on that exact same stable number. According to the theory, this is mathematical proof of its stability. Okay, so that's pretty neat for one number. But what happens when you run every single digit number from 0 all the way through 9 through this very same cycle? Well, this is where the theory makes its biggest, most surprising claim. So here they are, the results for every number. Now, you can see how some numbers transform. For example, the stable number 2 ends up becoming the bridge number 6. But forget the individual results for a second. Just look at the big picture. Just count up how many results land in each final category. And here it is. This is the punchline. The outcomes are split in a perfect 50-50 balance. Exactly 5 of the results are stable pillar numbers, and the other 5 are transformative bridge numbers. For people who believe in this theory, that's not some random coincidence. That's a clear sign of divine design and order. But as elegant as that balance might seem, this is exactly where the theory steps right into a theological minefield. It really sparks a very, very difficult debate. Is this a form of deep spiritual reflection, or is it a forbidden practice?
For a lot of mainstream Islamic authorities, the answer here is pretty clear-cut. They look at this and say, this is just numerology. A practice that's often used for divination, for trying to predict the future, which is considered strictly forbidden or haram in Islam.
Now, the proponents push back. They insist they are not predicting anything. They frame it as tadabbur, which is a kind of deep, permissible reflection on the Quran's structure. But critics argue that as soon as you start assigning hidden meanings to numbers and claiming you've unlocked some hidden knowledge, you've crossed a very important line into trying to know the unseen, or ghaib, which in Islam is a domain reserved for God and God alone. And this skepticism doesn't just come out of thin air. Many people remember the whole Code 19 controversy from back in the 70s. Its founder, a biochemist named Rashad Khalifa, he started with a numerical theory, but he eventually went so far as to reject 2 verses from the Quran just to make his math fit. And that whole episode now serves as a really powerful cautionary tale for scholars looking at these kinds of theories today. So, what do we take away from all this? Honestly, whether you look at the Mahani system and see proof of the divine, or you see it as just a clever mathematical curiosity, it really taps into something deeply human, this timeless search for patterns, for a hidden order in the world, especially within our most sacred texts.
So, in the end, what is this really? Is it a divine pattern, hidden in plain sight for all these centuries? Is it just a very clever, human-made puzzle? Or maybe just a fascinating coincidence? Ultimately, the answer you land on probably depends on where you, personally, draw that incredibly fine line between faith and formula.